Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the RotoViz Best Ball Show. My name is Colm Kelly. I'm joined today by Tom Strachan. We're about to do a DraftKings draft. We had some feedback that when I was over Sean, I'm so used to talking with Sean Siegel on these shows. It is not Sean, it's Tom at the UK Fantasy Football Collective. Myself and Tom did a panel over there talking best ball, and I was showing some of the feedback about why is there no DraftKings content up on this RotoViz YouTube channel. So I thought, let's get Tom in. Tom is in those DraftKings Best Ball streets on a regular basis. He obviously is over on his own YouTube channel as well at the Fantasy Sanctuary. We'll be talking a little bit more about that in a moment, but it is going to be fun to jump into the DraftKings side of things. People wonder sometimes how I get into these drafts, how I'm drafting over at Underdog, how I'm drafting in all these different platforms. But, DraftKings is not available in Ireland at the moment for best ball, so I had to, take an alternative approach, had to get a man over there in the UK to get involved with me. So, Tom, welcome onto the show. We did some streams last year. It's been great getting to know you over the last couple of seasons, and also great doing the panel over at the UK Fantasy Football Collective. I think that event was just such a massive success. I wanted to highlight it here at the top. It is already announced that in 12 months' time, another one of those coming. I was over last year at the actual Fantasy Football Expo over in Canton with Bob Long. He actually made the trip over for this one and was very impressed with it as well. So lots of fun times. But Tom, as we settle in on this Sunday evening, our time over here, afternoon over on the East Coast, how are you feeling today?
Yeah, doing very well. Like you say, it feels like only a blink of an eye since we were down in London talking all things best ball, and it was a great event. I mean, you kind of mentioned it, like the level of interest in best ball in the UK is really high now, and there's a lot of people who are really smart drafters as well. Perhaps not credited as much as it should be. Going back years when I first got into the NFL, it was a very casual thing for a lot of people here. But I think now more and more, the core audience over here are real fanatics like us, people who will do a lot of drafts. And yeah, it's been great getting to know you, drafting alongside you last year and then this year. And yeah, I mean, it's just best ball season, isn't it? I was kind of thinking about it today. There's only really just about a little over 50 days left until the season, and it's time to start thinking about what your exposures are like and how much you want to get more of a certain player at this point.
I often joke, when we're just post Super Bowl, maybe a week or two after, we're talking about, you have to go through the dynasty season, the best ball season, get into redraft season, and it all goes. And it's going to be here in the blink of an eye, but it really has flown by. We're in the middle of July already. The NFL season, I'm seeing on Twitter over the last couple of days, people talking about how many weeks it is just until we're ready to get back into those NFL Sundays. So it is really going to fly by. We have a lot of stuff to fit in over the next 2 months or so, but I'm looking forward to it. Dave here with a comment coming in. He already knows what's happening here. The Tom is in that Sean role. Maybe that's what I was afraid of when I mentioned that a moment ago. He's going to make me sweat out these picks.
I'm going to have to slow my pace down. I know that normally I quite tend to motor mouth it and just really rattle through, but it's going to take my time. The thing about this player is we don't know the season.
So we'll see what happens there. We'll see if he gives me any fear, but Tom has his hands on the controls for this draft. Michael watching along too. Like anyone watching along, hit that like button. We really appreciate that. Make sure you're subscribed to the RotoViz YouTube channel. We are going to get into the draft in a moment. We are going to, as the title says, we're going ZeroRB in this draft, no matter what, avoiding running backs for pretty much, I think, at least 6 rounds, but we're going to try to push it as far as we can, maybe into that 8th round if it all works out here for us, but maybe even further if those running back targets that we're looking at. There is only really 1 to 2 running back names. We'll mention them as we go through this draft after the picks are made, of course, but in those couple of rounds that we're actually looking to get. But the other news before we get into the draft is down in Tennessee. DeAndre Hopkins looks like he's in there with the Titans. That coming in shortly before we started to stream here today. Tom, what is your opening thoughts? I think it's going to be very interesting in terms of where people were probably predicting with their, something we talked about last week over at the Expo was, trying to pair these up with favorite landing spots and working those into stacks and pairing him with certain quarterbacks based on how it would go out. Pairing him with Ryan Tannehill may not have been the most popular of those options. So we'll see how that works out for people's shares. I'll get your thoughts on what you have been doing so far potentially with him prior to that. But it obviously puts him in there as the wide receiver 1 on this team. Then Treylon Burks probably fallen into the secondary role. But somebody who's going into his second year at wide receiver, I think that while this may take away some of that volume for him to have that alpha wide receiver on the opposing side of the field is going to, loosen up the attention on him a little bit. So I think efficiency may play into it rather than volume from the Burke side. Okonkwo, I think it also will help him. I just think it helps this offense in a multitude of ways, that now it's not just Derrick Henry and Treylon Burks with Okonkwo in there. You're filtering in with adding a major weapon. I think Tannehill's probably the major winner of this situation, but how are you, just a few minutes kind of after the news break, and how are you dissecting it here?
So I've already seen it spun both ways. I've seen it spun, this is the Titans not giving up on this season, seeing that Ryan Tannehill deserves one last throw of the dice and that DeAndre Hopkins is what he needs. But I've also seen it spun as, okay, this is the Titans preparing Will Levis to be the quarterback and making sure that when he is the quarterback, he's actually got serviceable weapons and that he's not just like drowning from the get-go. I kind of come down on it more that they're really... Mike Vrabel just doesn't have it in him to tank a year. Yeah, I can't believe for a minute that he wants to go into this season and not be as competitive as possible. I do think we're not really going to see a lot of a jump for DeAndre Hopkins in terms of ADP. I think where he's kind of at in that sort of back-end third, mid-fourth round, that seems kind of fine, really. I think we can probably be okay with that. Burks, I'd expect him possibly to drop a little bit like you. If anything, I'm more interested in him now than I was before when I thought the offense could be a bit of a dumpster fire. Chigoziem, I think, it probably takes a little bit of the pressure off, which was definitely being amplified onto him by the fantasy football community. And it probably makes life easier for Derrick Henry as well, who's maybe not going to have 1,000 touches this year.
I think that probably is fair. My fear with Derrick Henry this year is that it could be that part where the real tread and the tires catches up with him. But I do think, again, it's very hard to stack the box if in those opening plays or opening weeks of the season we're seeing DeAndre Hopkins look anything like what he has in the past, and then we're going to see hopefully a step forward in the second year from Treylon Burke. So I think it's going to be interesting. We'll see how that affects it in today's draft versus previous ADPs. We are going to do a ZeroRB draft, but what we'll do is we'll kick it off with jumping into the draft room here over in DraftKings. We'll talk through some of the potential ideas that we have. If you are watching along, drop in the comments your preferred. I guess we'll just go for 4-round start for a ZeroRB draft from current ADPs, what you would like to see. We'll talk through it. We'll see what we can do when we are drafting through, whether we get that early first round draft slot, a mid slot, or a late slot. It is going to be interesting in this draft based on that, but we are going to play it out and see what we can do. We're talking a little bit, Tom. We are well versed in ZeroRB drafts, obviously at this point, but we're looking at those opening 6 rounds. I think we're going to want a minimum of 4 wide receivers. People will think then, well, what's that going to do with the other positions? The elite tight end options, elite quarterback options are interesting. I've been pushing it a little bit at the quarterback positions this year, and I usually want to get one of those elite guys, but I'm letting it roll a little bit. Maybe get 2 guys then, in that kind of 8 through 13 range rather than getting one of those elite quarterbacks. So are you feeling the same way as we approach this draft and those opening stages? Are you really targeting those elite quarterbacks?
Yeah, I mean, it's really tricky to pay up for Jalen Hurts. I've got very minimal exposure to, but occasionally when you end up with AJ Brown in the first round, it's a little too hard to pass up on it. When you have Kelsey, it's a little too hard sometimes to pass up on the Mahomes stack. The Diggs, Josh Allen one, I've probably been fading a little more than the other 3. So it has, but yeah, it just feels really difficult. I think quite often you feel like the value is there in the next tier behind the first quarterbacks. It's like, just been doing Scott Fishbowl draft at the minute, and it's like you never want to take the first kicker. You want to take like one slightly further back. And I mean, I'm a Ravens fan, so I've got plenty of Lamar Jackson. I think that he is a really good value. Justin Fields as well. He could jump into that kind of real elite tier. And Justin Herbert, those are the guys where I've probably got more exposure than the really early ones. But yeah, so we are in the draft room and we'll be picking at the 110. Happy with that, Colm?
I think it's going to be interesting. I always joke on these that I've been very fortunate in the last couple of years. I had one season, it was actually the season that I had the most success. That was 2 years ago in best ball drafts. And that year I was just, it was after the 107 every time. This year and last year has been a lot of early draft picks. So I think it's going to be interesting as well for what we're trying to do here. If you have the 101, the 102 in these drafts, I find it very easy to go Jefferson or Chase. But once I get into the 4, 5, 6 range, I'm not as high on the veteran wide receivers, I think, as some people would be heading into this season. And by veterans, and it's not that I'm not into them, it's based on the other options at later prices. For example, you're looking at Tyreek Hill versus Jalen Waddle and things like that. But you're into Cooper Kupp, maybe a Travis Kelce at that point. So then it's Diggs, Adams. At this range, though, I'm more comfortable taking those guys rather than reaching that a little bit earlier. But I still think that I would be trying to look in here at the St. Brown, Lamb, AJ Brown kind of tier of guys, Jalen Waddle, Garrett Wilson. I'm probably looking here at trying to get 2 of those guys. So we'll see how it plays out. Maybe Travis Kelce slides back to us, but I'm not expecting that. The one part that it does make it tricky, you mentioned the Ravens. If you're in that mid to late second round, it also gives you the option that Mark Andrews may fall to you in the third. We're really unlikely to see that for us here at the back end of the third, and that gets us into then TJ Hawkinson, Pitts, Goddard, and that 3, 4, 5 range. So we'll see how it plays out. But yeah, I'm pretty excited to see how we go here in this draft room. The key from the later spot is you're not going to get Chase or Jefferson, but you're not really going to get those guys if you're not in the top 4 picks. And then you're also going to get the option to get, as I mentioned, the Waddles, the Wilsons, on the comeback again.
Yeah, we are seeing like Mark Andrews or Lamar kind of slide to the back end of a third sometimes at the minute, but it's rare to get both of them. It seems like really difficult to land that. But yeah, I think in terms of Kyle Pitts, I've seen Kyle Pitts falling into the 7th round on DraftKings. So if that happened today, I'd definitely be plenty happy.
Any prime targets as we wait here until it will come around to our pick? Kelsey's off the board. We've seen Christian McCaffrey as the first running back. Then we have the regular wide receivers all off the board. 3 selections to go before ours. Are you out on Diggs and Adams? Are you not out on, not that you're out on them, but are you passing on those guys for the younger, Lamb?
Yeah,
Brian,
I'm finding
St.
Diggs harder to pick. I mean, he just goes off at pick 7, so that's a headache gone. But yeah, I've got 10% exposure to AJ Brown, 11% CD Lamb, 8% to Amon Ra, and then 3% to Devontae Adams. Like, I just find the Raiders could really be a complete tire fire. I think the situation with Jimmy G, although they seem to be happy with their options going into the season, I just think the value of the targets which he's going to see isn't going to be as high as Derek Carr, who really did try to drive the ball down the field.
So we are 1 pick away. The last pick was Amon-Ra St. Brown. I do think he did go, and we weren't going to take him anyway, but Eckler was a very interesting option for people that were trying to target some running back options here. But we are on the clock. I'm probably leaning here towards CD Lamb, but I'm also open to going the AJ Brown route if you want.
I'm completely fine with CD Lamb. I think, you go back and look at how things played out last year, and there were definite weeks where, even in best ball, it's fine, but like, where Dallas Goedert would be the target leader or Devonta Smith would come home with all the points. So I just think CD Lamb, with this Cowboys offense, I'm not worried about Brandon Cooks. I'm not worried about Michael Gallup being particularly elite. I think he's going to have a better season than last year as he recovers from the ACL. But yeah, I think CD Lamb could really jump into those kind of top 5 wide receivers by this time next year.
Yeah, I would much agree with that. The other part is that when we look at it, we talked about Hopkins, and it was, I think, unlikely that he would end up with Dallas, but that was still a potential option. And somebody like Lamb, then, Cooks is coming across him, but it's freeing up that target option. I also had a hope that maybe that Brian would make it back, but he doesn't. Bijan Robinson goes, then Brian, then Barkley. So we're up again in 1 selection. Devontae Adams is there. We talked about some of the potential concerns with that. I would be going Garrett Wilson or Waddle here, and I'm open to both options. And based on potential quarterback options later in this draft, I would be open to going Waddle if you wanted, but I know by ADP we would be going with Wilson.
No, I'm good with that because, I mean, the overlay tools I've got, I have them set at this point in the season to tell me how many times I've paired them with my wide receiver 1, my running back 1, my quarterback 1, and stuff like that. And Waddle and Lamb is a pairing that I've got no exposure to. And I think it's the right time now to be looking at stuff like that. Like if you're doing a lot of drafts, like I'll max enter this DraftKings tournament of 150 entries, and you want to be finding those kind of little pairings, which might be underowned by other drafters and that you don't have exposure to yourself. So yeah, I'm very happy with that start.
There's a few things just looking into it, when I'm looking at certain games, it could be interesting when we get to week 17, with the Cowboys, the Lions. I think some of the options that you can potentially get in for the Lions later on to pair with the example of a Lamb. you can either do that with bringbacks if you go in and end up with a Lions stack from that side. I'm not drafting with Stack Prescott at the moment, but you can go from that side. It starts to open up options. The reason where passing on AJ Brown, we could have went Brown and then go with Hurts, as a stack in those first 2 picks, but you're really limiting what you can do then in other directions, I think, and you're putting a lot of investment into that one particular situation. And I think because it is something that people can do in the first and second round like that, it becomes much more commonplace. But yeah, that was kind of the reason. The other part is I'm not drafting a lot of Aaron Rodgers, so you have the Wilson side then, but you could go, on the opposite side if you are looking to week 17, and obviously the week 17 correlations for bringbacks and so on, a lot of topic of debate around it at the moment. I don't think it is as important, as some people will say, but I do think having those potential options, if you can do it at price and make it work, make a lot of sense. And I think something that we talked about at the Best Ball panel that we did, Tom, was, drafting stacks that are very easy to access that other people maybe necessarily won't want, and that'll be some ugly stacks that we may even get into drafting in this draft. So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, I think that's an interesting start with Lamb and Waddle. And I think that, again, when I'm in a tiebreaker with an Adams and a Waddle, I'm looking at who may ascend into those top, you mentioned Lamb being a top 5 wide receiver next year. Well, he's not very far away from that, but I do think he could really be right there with Jefferson and Chase, the way we talk about them. Whereas I think Kupp and Hill, Diggs, Adams, they're likely to continue to just slide down draft boards just based on age and the profile of those players as they get older. And so I'm very happy with the start. That means that we have taken 2 of the players that we were potentially I think I had a kind of template there at the back end of the draft of 5 players, so we got 2 of the 5, so I'm happy with that. But when we look here now to the players I'd been hoping that could potentially have slid back to us, it's Higgins who's no longer there, it's Chris Olave, Devontae Smith, all gone at this point, as I would have expected. But then you're Mark Andrews, Keenan Allen, Deebo Samuel. They're kind of the players that you're hoping the slides back here. Have you a preference for who this 310 may be?
No, you can look at Mark Andrews for that week 17 correlation if you want it, or Debo's somebody that Mark Andrews goes off the board to the Tyreek Hill drafter. But yeah, Debo's somebody that I was a little slow to get on board with, but the more I kind of dug into the stats and you looked at things like, okay, when everyone was healthy, which was a very small amount of games, he had I think he led the Niners in target share. His rush attempts per game, total touches didn't really suffer when Christian McCaffrey was there. So I'm very much backing on Deebo Samuel. I think he's going to be a very good value player. So yeah, I've been drafting him. Keenan Allen, somebody I keep taking. I'm completely fine with him. So we're kind of 1 pick away, and it is Keenan Allen at the top, Lamar Jackson, Calvin Ridley. Do you want to go Keenan Allen or MNC?
I'm happy to go with Allen here. What I'm thinking is, then hopefully we're getting potentially Samuel. The next pick for me is Samuel or Judy. They're like, I got a bit of stick for this over at the UK event, but I'm not in at all on Cooper, and we may talk Elijah Moore later, but that's the way I'm playing that offense. So we'll see how it gets back to us. But yeah, Keenan Allen for me was the option. I like DK Metcalf. I think he was somebody when you sent over your board that he may not be on your list of players that you're looking to get this year, but we can play that also, that offense through JSN, for example. So Deebo did go on the next selection. So we're kind of hoping, for me, Judy is the pick I'm hoping to get. Have you anyone else that, if we don't get Judy, that falls in? Calvin Ridley's there, somebody again who I'm not drafting very much, not because I don't like Calvin Ridley, but the year off, the time before that with injuries off, goes into an offense where there is kind of some familiarity with the other players in it based on how they played last year. And interestingly, today we also seen Evan Ingram get that contract extension. So nice for him after, was with the Giants, didn't work out, been around the league a little bit, gets a bit of security now moving forward. So 1 pick away, Jerry Jeudy's there. Who's the alternative?
I don't mind Christian Kirk. I think his role feels fairly secure, but Jerry Jeudy comes back to us. He's one of those kind of week 17 correlations that we don't have to force. I'm more than happy to take Jeudy here.
Okay, he's my clear pick. And anytime as we go through this, if there's a player that you don't want, you want to make the case for it, don't be afraid. And the other thing, you are at the controls. You can say to me, oh yeah, I really love Jerry Jeudy, and then we timed out.
So
we got
just going
Christian
back
Kirk
to just in terms of Amari Cooper, yeah, like I'm kind of out on that offense at the minute. It feels like Amari Cooper's a little more expensive than I'm kind of comfortable paying. Like when he falls to the back end of a fourth, I'm fine with it. And then DK Metcalf, yeah. Again, it's like I love Tyler Lockett. I think that we talk about every year he's perennially undervalued. And then JSN, I'm really high on, particularly in this full PPR format. I think that by the time that the games really count down the stretch,
by week 17, by week 17 again, we're going to see a shake up in that depth chart, I think.
And people talk about the fact that the Seahawks didn't play a lot of free wide receiver sets. But go and look at who they had last year. They didn't have a wide receiver worth it. And then you look at Shane Waldron, who's their offensive coordinator. He left the Rams the year after Cooper Kupp had gone insane. He saw firsthand what like that kind of slot player can do. And you're telling me that they won't be able to find a way to use JSN. So it's like, I mean, I really like DK Metcalf. He's a fun footballer, and he's somebody who's a real joy to watch. But I just don't think the difference between Metcalf in the third and where Lockett and JSN are going sort of like 30, 40 picks later is something that I'm buying.
Yeah, and I remember when I went over to, there's a lot of Expo talk on this, but when I went over last year to the Expo in Canton, I flew over to Washington and stayed with Zachary Kruger, and we did a road trip, about 6-hour road trip up to Ohio to the event. And we were talking about that. One of the players I kept debating on him with was DK Metcalf, but I remember I kept saying, he was in the 5th and 6th round at that point last kind of August kind of time, and at that point he becomes a player who's very easy to be all in on. But when we're looking at where he's going now, and you mentioned then the gap to those other players, and the one of those that I would be targeting would be JSN rather than Lockett for some of the reasons that I mentioned, with, for example, the Keenan Allen, Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp side of things. But this year, just the price has gone up, and that makes it a little bit trickier to buy in on it. TJ Hawkinson, who was one of my tight end targets, was my biggest tight end target last year, is going to be a target this year, but can be tricky to wrap in. But I really like to get Allen and Jeudy there. You mentioned it's kind of a stack that we didn't even have to work to do. They face each other week 17. So things like that are nice, and they're all targets that we're looking to get. We do see a few wide receivers going off the board here. Watson, London, Williams, DJ Moore, Terry McLaurin, then Aaron Jones going off the board. When we're looking at some of the options here over these next couple of picks, there is the potential to, get into even the JSN territory where we talked about, but I mentioned some of the tight end options. One of those that I would like to get is either Pitts or Goddard as our kind of anchor tight end here in this build. They usually are going to be the players maybe we target after this pick at the next pick. Players who go in this range that I'd be very interested in. London, Watson, they're gone. DJ Moore's gone, but Deontay Johnson, Chris Godwin, Brandon Ayuk. I know Ayuk was one of your big guys last year, and I don't know if that's going to be the case this year as well.
I think, last year it was one where I had visions of him and Trey Lance with the deep ball, and I'm not sure it's on now. Justin Herbert goes a pick before us, which we could have had for the stack. So in terms of wide receivers, Chris Godwin, Deontay Johnson, Tyler Lockett, Marquise Brown, Mike Evans.
Those first two are the ones that I would like. You can pick which one you want to jump in for.
Let's go with
Godwin.
Let's go with Godwin. Godwin's kind of like my slight lean there. I've got a bit more exposure to him. I think that he can play the kind of Jarvis Landry role with Baker Mayfield and still see enough volume no matter how much of a hiccups going on with our offense. And I think he's going to be okay. I'm not too worried about him particularly. But in terms of stacks, we've given ourselves loads of outs to different stacks that we can look at later. Kyle Pitts goes one pick before us.
Yeah, we get a tight end. So I'm into a territory here where I really do think if you pass on Goddard, you're really waiting then at tight end. So I'm open to passing on him for an alternative option. But for me, it is really Goddard as the tight end play. Do you want to go with Johnson here? I'm okay to push it if you want to go with Johnson, because it is a bit of a
let's go with Johnson. I think on DraftKings, with it being full PPR, we can, and with the 20 rounds, we can get up to 3 tight ends, and we can still probably be comfortable.
That is the one difference. Obviously, I mentioned I'm not drafting at DraftKings as much, but when we look at the options with those extra 2 rounds, I know everyone has those extra 2 picks, but you can do things a little bit more creatively. The one question I'll have there is with Deontay Johnson at that pick, if Kyle Pitts last, is Pitts the clear pick for you there over Johnson?
Yeah, I would have taken round 6 Pitts all day.
Yeah.
I think there would have been no chance of him making it back to us in the late 7th. And
the other question is hindsight on that. I don't think I would have. I think I was going to go with the wide receiver, and I was quite confident that he probably gets back to us there. And I also would have taken Goddard in that situation, so I was quite comfortable waiting. But would you rather have Pitts and Johnson, potentially Pitts and Godwin, versus what we have ended up with?
Maybe, but I think it was the right decision to try and push him around the corner. And you look at it, and it's so rare that a team's going to double tap tight end at that position in the draft. I think, on another day that could easily have gone round.
I would have to imagine we're looking at some sort of 49ers build here, with Debo and Kittle in there. So we'll see what happens as we move forward here. But I think it's interesting so far looking at this board. We have gone now 6 rounds, 6 wide receivers, but 4 wide receivers, the most true any of the other teams, a lot of them in that 3 wide receiver range. So when we're setting up a team like this, sometimes when I'm thinking about a tight end in the 6th, I'm thinking wide receiver has been hit a little bit heavier in this room. But this here, actually, in terms of what could happen for a 0RB build, is probably as optimal as you would have through these opening rounds. So pushing it at wide receiver, trying to extend that advantage with Deontay Johnson. The other part is going to be interesting here. Pickens is somebody who I do really like as well. And that was one of the reasons why, although I do like Deontay Johnson, you might let things slide a little bit. But if you get into a range here where Pickens makes it back to us, you can pair up on the Steelers. You can potentially then get into the Kenny Pickett range of things, and maybe even Pat Fairmouth. Maybe we go all in the Steelers here and we'll see what happens. But I think we're into an interesting range. I mentioned about tight end, and I also mentioned about Evan Ingram, and he's obviously in this zone as well of tight ends. Do you think it's as much of a drop-off as I mentioned there once you go past Goddard? How are you playing tight end this year? I'm trying to get one of those opening guys before Goddard.
Yeah, I really have next to no exposure to Darren Waller, and it's one of those ones that kind of surprised me. It's not been a conscious fade. I think I just like the wide receivers in this range a bit more. Like I like Gabe Davis at cost, I like Jordan Addison, George Pickens, I've been drafting a bit, and Jahan Dotson I've drafted plenty of. So like in this range, there's plenty of other players I do like, but Darren Waller's sitting top of ADP, sort of going to be 10 picks past ADP if we did want him. And I could definitely make a case for him being a top 3 tight end this year. We are back on the clock.
You can make the case, then go ahead and do it.
Well, he's the only big target for Daniel Jones, and he needs somebody who can play inside and outside, which is him. But I'm happy.
We're in a range here where he definitely doesn't play past ADP. You're looking at Pickens, you're looking at Dotson as my 2 primary picks after this, but we can go tight end here if you did want that. And
let's go Pickens. Let's lean into the Steelers.
Well, we do know that it's very unlikely that the drafter going after us here is going to go tight end again with So if the team in 12 doesn't take a tight end, I think we're very much in play for Waller if it comes back. He's not somebody who I'm actively targeting at all, but when you price things like that into it, I think it can be interesting, particularly for the way we're constructing this build and trying to be unique. So if team 12 here passes twice, I think we're open to it. Pickens and Johnson leads us into a situation where we're likely looking to get Pickett in a little bit, so let's add him in with a star beside his name to get into the queue. We have a few comments coming in as well. We have Drew mentioning that this is perfect timing. He's doing an anchor RB or a hero RB draft. Some people would call that modified 0RB, but we don't hear them saying that very often anymore. That would be myself probably and nobody else. But he's pushing it for a second running back, so we'll see what we do here, and hopefully that'll help him moving forward. Darren Waller did go off the clock, so pitch me the next options here of what you're looking to do. Dotson is my pick, but I'm also interested in the likes of James Cook here. You could probably tempt me with White, but I'd be more interested in Cook as the first running back. He is one of the prime running back targets that I have in our list here.
I think, it's either I'm happy to take Cook. I know he's somebody you like, or Dak Prescott for the stack, but I'm not in a rush really to get the stack. I don't know how you feel.
I'm okay passing on quarterback. I also love Dotson so much, but it is a case that I think James Cook is the really smart play based on what we've done so far in this draft.
Yeah, I haven't drafted any James Cook this year. I've been kind of quite heavy on Damian Harris. I've been sprinkling in a tiny bit of Latavius Murray lately, but I think James Cook's one of those players that I could do with a little more with. But sometimes in these drafts, I've been waiting till if I've gone hero RB, then I'm not taking another running back till like round 9, round 10, and that's when that kind of tier of running backs comes round. So he's definitely somebody I will be trying to get a little bit more exposed
Something
to.
that has always been, I don't know if it's an Achilles heel or something that I'll continue to target until I never play fantasy sports again, but the Buffalo running backs are something that I always try and target as those running backs who maybe aren't as expensive in the high-powered offenses. And the one difficult part is Josh Allen has been exceptionally good rushing it in from close distances, which takes it away a little bit from the running backs. We used to see that quite a bit from Cam Newton back in the day, where his running backs used to, Jonathan Stewart was like one of the best running backs between the 20s in the NFL, but once it got inside the opponent's 20-yard line, it was Cam Newton time. So we'll see what happens with James Cook. But I think when we're looking at offenses and running backs with extreme high upside, Cook fits into that. Obviously, there is running back competition there with Harris as well, but like taking that shot there in that range. The other one looking at the board who by ADP tends to go in this range or in the next range that I really, really like, and we'll see if he makes it back to us, is DeAndre Swift. There's a couple of running backs coming up in this zone that Swift did go. I was wondering when you mentioned the list there by ADP and Swift wasn't there. So that is quite a bit early for Swift. That was the 512. He's usually kind of in that late 7th round range. So he was somebody who I was wondering then when we did pick Cook and I didn't see him in the round above. I was wondering what's happened here with Swift. So that option has been ruled out. But yeah, prime targets in that range for me are Swift and Cook, and that kind of 7-8 turn as we plotted out what we might do in this draft. But yeah, that's one of the first times I've passed over Dotson. But when you have 7 wide receivers already, maybe that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of running backs, there's a decent bunch kind of coming up for us. Samaje Perine, Brian Robinson, Antonio Gibson, Zach Charbonnet, Jamal Williams, Jarrett McKinnon, Khalil Herbert, Devin A-Chain, then Damian Harris further down, which probably is off our board. Anybody that you particularly want here, Colm?
Out of this list, and I just see it looks like we just lost out in Robinson. Is that correct?
Yeah.
He was the target. I'm not against going here with Perine. I think he's somebody who's interesting. What other options have we though across the board at ADP?
So we could go with Daniel Jones, Geno Smith, kind of close to the top. Beckham, Bateman, Jameson Williams,
all those wide receivers. Yeah.
Schultz.
So I think we're back to running back, and for me it's Gibson or Perine. If you have a preference from those guys, go for it.
Let's go Gibson, just because I've seen Perine fall a little bit over the last few days at times, and he might make it back.
I like Perine. I like Javonte Williams quite a bit more, just in terms of where you're at the controls. Where did Javonte go in this draft? It's usually not too far. They're not too separated by ADP, which I think Javonte went 7-11.
7th round, yeah.
Yep, he's always open. So I think a lot of these running back rooms, when we're looking at Gibson or Brian Robinson usually goes a couple of picks after him. I'm usually trying to get the one that I don't have them separated all that much. I'm usually trying to take the cheaper one. So with, like, for example, I talked about Cook, but you mentioned there Harris potentially being off. I'm very rarely going to draft both of those guys in the same team, but across all the drafts I do, I'm going to very likely have those guys on both. I'm kind of, when I'm getting into this range, I have certain players that I'm trying to target, and they are both in that range. So I'm kind of betting on the backfield and also the talent of the player, but both of them together based on how the draft's fallen. A few names that I do like in this range when we're looking, pennies in the mix for me here. Not against Herbert as an option. Even though with the way we built this team, I wouldn't be against adding in Harris, but I really think the next running back I'm interested in is Penny. I see you looking at Charbonnet. Is he somebody that you're strongly interested in?
I don't mind him. I think there's some upside, and he gives us a little week 17 correlation, but I'm happy. Penny or Charbonnet, you pick.
Go Charbonnet, because I think there's a chance that Penny may last back to us in the next round.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've got 3 running backs on the bounce there. Now we've got 3-7-0-3-7-0. I think that we're going to start getting some quarterback values for us because every other team in the draft has at least one quarterback so far. So I feel okay about it. How about you?
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. The questions we'll probably ask when we go back at the end of this draft to see what we may have done in hindsight. We're probably going to look at that, as much as I said I wasn't pushed on Waller, what would that do for this roster, changing things around? It'll be interesting after this to see what some of the picks we could have switched are, but most of the ones we've decided on here, when we're in the Cook, Gibson, Charbonnet tier here, we're kind of thinking, well, we want a running back, and they're the running backs we want. Like, ideally, I would like James Robinson to last. I probably, like, in a 1-for-1, I would rather Robinson over Gibson. But, they go 3 picks apart from each other in this draft. So there's not much we can do in those situations. There's so far, there isn't a lot I would change, but I do think tight end at the pitch, taking pitch that bit early could have been an interesting call. But we're trying to also not reach too much as we go through this entire build to see how it plays out. So you mentioned quarterback. I think we're getting into that particular range. Just looking back, I seen Fairmouth off the board. Just go back to the board. I just want to see how that team's doing at quarterback in terms of the draft board. So we have the Fairmouth team here in 2. They have 2 tight ends. They have Trevor Lawrence as well. So I'm hoping that means that they're not really going to want to get a second quarterback here after Trevor Lawrence. I think we're going to be targeting getting Pickett with this roster based on having both Pittsburgh Steelers wide receivers. He is somebody who goes quite a bit after this, but it might be when we get to the second pick here coming up for us, which will be, obviously we have a pick coming up, then we have a second pick. That's how these things work. But he's probably in that range. So ideally, I'm probably looking here. My ideal selections may be Penny followed by Pickett. In a situation like this, you may go and reach and take Pickett and then hope Penny gets back to you to make sure you get that stack, because it would help the overall build of the roster. But scroll up, for me, on team 11 and team 12, just do we see, so yeah, we have Jackson, we have Burrow, so they both are 1 quarterback teams. So it'll be an interesting decision if we have Penny's gone off the board. We no longer have that decision. Doesn't matter anymore. My excitement has plummeted.
I think we're all right though in terms of quarterback. I mean, we could look at Russell Wilson for that Jerry Jeudy stack, which we've got. So there's still definitely
there's lots of options. There's lots of options. It's one of those sort of ones, like it doesn't really make sense for a team probably to really, unless it's well after ADP at this point, to go with Pickett, unless they just want Pickett on his own. But we'll see what happens. As you know, Tom, when we're doing these drafts, we see a lot stranger things happen than that. So we'll see. So we're going through a couple of the running backs though that I really do like that I had highlighted.
We could take Russ Wilson and then try and push Dulcich around the corner, or take Dulcich and push Russ around the corner.
I'd probably go Dulcich before I go Russ.
Yeah, you happy with that ahead of running back?
Yeah.
Let's wait.
So we'll see. The countdown's on. Goff goes off the board. Wilson goes off the board.
Well, that's okay.
We got Dulcich, though. He can't get Dulcich.
Yeah.
So we're back on the clock, our options that are available. I think we're in a spot here where I'm interested in, I don't know what you're going to say with this. I'm interested in Singletary. Rank by all, just so we see ADP across the board. We've 16
so it's still quite a way down to Singletary.
I think there.
Yeah, I mean, Jalen Warren's there. Elijah Mitchell, we've got 7 seconds.
You make the call. You're at the clock.
I'm going to go with Jalen Warren. It gives us a little week 17 correlation against Zach Charbonnet, and that's not really the kind of correlation we're always wanting, but adds on to the Steelers stack. And we saw Jalen Warren actually, he was better than Najee Harris in yards per reception last year. So just
do you think this is this me or is this you that's saying George Pickens in this way? George Pickens. We got this one too. So it must be, I would guess it's me. I would have to imagine it's me. But we'll see. The other thing that obviously Warren gets us more invested in that Pittsburgh Steelers offense. So we're all aboard Pittsburgh here to get things set up. What would you do that differently now? I'm not pushed on getting Wilson there. What was your thoughts now on having Dulcich and Warren versus potentially Wilson and Dulcich, if that had worked out?
I mean, I am kind of in on Russ this year for that kind of post-hype bounce back, but not to the point where any time where somebody snipes me on him that I'm crying about it. I think, there's plenty of
you wait after the stream's over for that.
There's plenty of ways it works out this year where Sean Payton just really slows down the way that the Broncos play, and that Jerry Jeudy gets there on efficiency, but Russ doesn't have any big blow-up games, and he's putting up like 16 points a week instead of the kind of 20 that we want.
I would agree with that. I think, though, looking at how things are playing out, there's players here who, I'd be targeting at wide receiver, and I've kind of not been paying as much attention to the draft slot of wide receiver over the last couple of rounds, but you're into a range here where potentially Curtis Samuel would be going, for example. He's somebody I really like in this zone if you weren't heavy at wide receiver so far. But running backs, Algier, I mentioned Singletary. Are those guys that you're interested in? I think we are, though, in the Pickett zone now at this point, if he does make it back to us. And then I think it's another running back.
Yeah, I'm completely fine taking Pickett if he makes it back to us.
The other
he does make it past the Pat Fryer move team, so it feels like we've got a pretty good chance, because every team before us now, apart from one, has 2 quarterbacks already. I'll take Pickett here, and then Singletary or Tyler Algier. I like both of them at running back.
And the other thing is, now at this point, we have obviously jumped in. We've got ourselves, some running backs at this point, but we are in a range again where pivoting back to, there's not a lot of wide receivers in these later rounds that I'm really looking to target. So if there is anyone that does pop up, I mentioned Samuel, for example, he may be somebody that I would detour for if he is available over a running back in these next couple of rounds. So is he somebody that you're interested in? I think probably I had a few people reach out over the last week asking me about, Washington, particularly Sam Howell, and, why I like him so much, but I kind of am bought in very much on the Washington offense. And is that something that you're in on as well?
Yeah. So first off, Kenny Pickett makes it back. Let's just get that done. Yeah,
that has to be the pick. Yeah.
Right at ADP as well, so we played that nicely. Curtis Samuel. I mean, Curtis Samuel won me a lot of money a couple of years ago when he had that kind of breakout year where Teddy Bridgewater had 3 wide receivers inside the top 24s. And everybody keeps projecting what Antonio Gibson could be under Eric Bieniemy, but perhaps it's just Curtis Samuel's going to be that kind of pass-catching, occasional running back. We're back on the clock.
No, I think for me here, I think Samuel's the pick, unless you strongly recommend one of these. I know by ADP, but if I look down through this list, Mingo's interesting. Peoples-Jones, I don't want, but the wide receivers that are listed, there's a lot of names here. Alec Pierce, Shaheed. I like Mims, but Renfro, Reed, so I have him significantly higher in this tier. So that also puts us into the Sam Howell sweepstakes.
I'm completely fine with that. I think Curtis Samuel, it feels like the range of outcomes is going to be massive for him this year. He could be like last year where Carson Wentz was just dumping down to him and he looked like the absolute hero late round pick last year for those first 2 weeks. And then kind of not an awful lot else happened. And perhaps he's kind of the candidate to be cut or moved on from. But I just think he's kind of Dotson and McLaurin.
The other thing, and this is you can kind of tell yourself stories when, and paint pictures, when you're in the off season and looking through potential options. But you look at Samuel and you look at what Eric Bieniemy has done with the Kansas City Chiefs and some of the players that they have had there, and kind of, movement roles, I guess you could call them, and what they've been able to create in that offense. And out of the offense here for Washington, Samuel really fits that role the best. I think the other player that you could potentially put into that is Gibson, and ironically, we've drafted him in this as well. And the difficult part is, if you're looking at Gibson having a real upside, you're hoping that he's more involved in the passing game. And if you're looking at Samuel having a real upside, you want him to be involved very close to the line of scrimmage. So both of those guys may eat into each other's work. But, I think when we're looking at the overall roster construction, it works out here. And I think the question I would look at here when we're doing ZeroRB is, we obviously started off with 7 straight wide receivers. A lot of the time people then are just like, we're done. It might only be 4 rounds of wide receivers, but then it's just a random draft. But you have to keep pushing that advantage, and taking Samuel there as your 8 wide receiver is, I think, a decision that a lot of people will be uncomfortable with doing, and thinking we have to get those running backs. And we may have also missed out on some of our targets because, for example, Singletary, we talked about earlier, is gone. But how did you feel getting back into the wide receivers there after?
I'm completely fine with it, because I think on DraftKings last year, you looked at the teams that got to the finals, and I think it was something like about over 53% of the teams in the finals had over 8 wide receivers, and then there was a lot of the most common build involved 8 wide receivers. You saw a lot of teams with 10 wide receivers in the finals, so it's not a format to completely lay off them. And just going back to what you said about Washington, I think although they might eat into each other a little bit, we were also now playing the idea that this Washington team's going to be bad and going to be in hurry up and playing lots of passes, and that can only be good for us. We are 1 pick away. Sam Howell here, or do you want to take another player first? The teams after us both are 3 quarterbacks, so we could go running back.
Unless we have somebody screaming out that we really have to get, and the one that I'm looking at is Hubbard, but I think that we probably can get Hubbard back around the corner here. So you happy to go with Howell?
Yeah, let's go with Howell. He doesn't clash with Kenny Pickett's bye week, so now we do have a quarterback room of Kenny Pickett and Sam Howell, which isn't possibly screaming out huge upside, but for this kind of late round quarterback build, I do
screaming out a theme of my 2023 season.
Well, Chuba Hubbard comes back. Should we take him for our 5th running back?
Yeah.
So now we've got a 2-5-8-1 build: CeeDee Lamb, Jalen Waddle, Keenan Allen, Jerry Jeudy, Chris Godwin, Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, James Cook, Antonio Gibson, Zach Charbonnet, Greg Dulcich, Jalen Warren, Kenny Pickett, Curtis Samuel, Sam Howell, and Chuba Hubbard. I think it's pretty decent.
Yeah, so that's us now through 16 selections. So we have 17, 18, 19, 20. We have 4 picks left. Probably will skew very much here to looking at some tight end options, because we're going to be a little bit limited there. We will need some running back options. But I mentioned, some of the prime running backs that I have, targeted in this range, and one of those last ones that I really wanted to get for a team that is going as late at running back as we have was Hubbard. So that was a nice one to get in. I think he could be a real breakout piece of this Panthers offense this year. So I think that worked out pretty well for us. Looking at some of the options, I think we can get into a stage of there's 4 picks left. We can star all the players we want to get, but we're into a situation. I'll let you go in. Obviously, you had to star likely there, but Trey McBride's one that I'll star as well. There's a lot of players here I won't be against. Mayer might be gone before he gets back, but Hunter Henry, Logan Thomas really fits into this team now as well as a late round tight end here for us to pair in. But when we're going down through, I think maybe you're getting into the desperation zone once we're sliding past there. I like to mention Cade Otton on all my podcasts, but
I mean, Cade
never somebody who I actively draft, but I always think he's somebody who, if you're really stuck at the end of drafts, fits in. And
if we wanted to, we could push this into a 3 quarterback build with Baker Mayfield to give us the Godwin stack, and then take Cade Otton after it. So
there's lots of interesting ways, and I do think that we talked about at the start, getting those expensive stacks, but there is a lot of ways where you can kind of almost start backdoor stacking these teams, at the end of drafts. Somebody who's interesting, don't think he'll get back. Obviously he's in the real veteran tier, but in a PPR format, Cordell Patterson's always interesting. He goes off as I click it. So we did say his name, but he's now gone. But yeah, I think we're into a zone here where any running backs really standing out for you in this range. We get the Bengals running backs as potential late round options. Chase Brown's there. But I think we're just going to go with best option available for this build as we move forward. Have you any strong running backs that you're looking for at this stage of the draft?
I mean, I obviously draft a lot of.
Obviously, we're in the 17th round. It's going to be limited.
So Michael Mayer does make it back. We could take him if you want. I do draft a bit of Gus Edwards just because I think he's going to get plenty of touchdowns and be a part of this high-powered offense. But
it makes sense in a team like this. So if you're going to tempt me into it, usually these Ravens that you want me to pick late in drafts do not work out. But let's go for Gus Edwards here.
I'm still catching heat in a couple of discords for the James Prochet talk that was brought up at the expo. But so I mean, I think 6 running backs is kind of fine. We're back on the clock. And at tight end, Hayden Hurst, Isaiah Likely, Noah Fant, Trey McBride.
Do you like Likely over McBride or Fant?
I think I prefer to go Fant here. I think, again, it gives us week 17 correlation with our big Pittsburgh stack, which is kind of nice,
Okay, I think we take one of either of those tight ends, and Fant or McBride, would be my preference. So you take your one.
Let's go Noah Fant.
Now that you've taken Fant, I'm going to say that I would have rather take McBride, but I wanted to do that. But at the next turn, I really would be interested in getting Logan Thomas to go with the Washington side of things. He may not be there, but I do think some of those tight ends will make it back to us. So Fant is interesting there as well. So we have Dulcich and Fant. It's possible, I don't know how you feel about this. You know, it could be a 2 quarterback, 4 tight end build, or how are you looking at rounding this out as we sit here?
Yeah, I think generally when I've waited past round 12 to grab a quarterback, I have gone 3 quarterback. But looking at the players that are left, you know, Ryan Tannehill was somebody who was going in the 20th round, and then on the back of DeAndre Hopkins news, 17th round, Baker Mayfield went in the 17th round to a team with Geno and Patrick Mahomes, so I'm not really sure I would have done that in that position. See Will Levis go. So at quarterback, I mean, it's Trey Lance, which I can't do it. Cooper Rush, Blaine Gabbert, Sam Darnold. Like, there's nobody there worth a draft pick, in my opinion. So yeah, I think lean into tight end and lean into the uncertainty. A few weeks back on my channel, I had James Brimacombe on, and he quite often auto drafts a lot of teams at the same time and then just drops in towards the end of drafts to finesse them. And something he quite likes to do is not take a tight end until the last 4 rounds and then take 4 of them. So at the time I was a little nervous about it, but when we saw it play out, I was actually quite pleased with the results. So I'd be okay taking another 2 tight ends here.
So we'll see what happens. McBride was one of my preferences, but he is gone. But in this build, the one I would like to get is Thomas. I do think it'll be a case that we get 1 and we'll be okay with it. Just looking, we have a week 14 bye. If we were to get Logan Thomas, we have Dulcich on a week 9. We have Fant on a week 5. So it would fit as well, you know, to try and spread those tight end points out as things go forward. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. Have you any other targets here that you're looking at in the last 2 rounds to try and put on the roster? The other thing, while Tom is about to think about potential targets, is anyone that's watching, if you can drop a like on this video, click that thumbs up. We would really appreciate that. We appreciate everyone watching along. We will look for some questions at the end. So if you have any questions about what we've done in the draft so far, put it in the chat. We'll answer some of those at the end. But hit that subscribe button, hit that like button as we continue on here throughout these last 2 selections. Back on the clock. Any pitches for me?
No, I think it's got to be tight end. I think Hunter Henry or Logan Thomas, and Logan Thomas makes the most sense, really, to go first. So let's
0% Logan Thomas drafted, so we'll have to fix that as well. So
I mean, what I would say is I think there's the Commanders were a team I expected to chase tight end at some point this offseason. They didn't. Should we take Hunter Henry here?
Look at our go to running back just to see what other potential options we have. We'll have 24 seconds.
Banakanda, Kyron Williams.
Yeah, Chase I think we're probably okay. Quarterback options that are left. We'll do a full
Sam Darnold.
No, we're done. Yeah, so let's go with Henry.
Yeah, I think just going back to what you were saying, in terms of these late round targets, there's not really massive players alike. I take some Robert Woods because Pat Crane's been talking him up, and when a man who won $2 million talks somebody up, it seems wise to sprinkle some in. Wan'Dale Robinson, I don't mind a little bit of with those kind of builds where I'm quite wide receiver heavy, so that I know that I'm not going to need him early on in the season. Laviska Shenault, very occasionally I might talk myself into it, but Devontae Parker, who's now kind of climbed up to the 18th round after his contract, Darius Slayton, Corey Davis. I don't mix them all in, but there's nobody who I'm feeling so strong about that I have over sort of 15% at the minute. I think it's one of those years where we're kind of waiting for the training camp stuff to pop up and
shake up the market.
Yeah, I mean, I've left myself. I'm at about, I think this is draft 74 for me in this contest, and the intention was always to leave about half my drafts for training camps so that I could make up for any areas I've missed out on.
Yeah, when we look through the players that have gone in those last kind of 3 or 4 rounds, Zamir White is a running back. He went 17-1 that I'm interested in. You know, looking at running backs with big gaps between their ADP and the starting running backs ADP, so him and Josh Jacobs. But you get some of the, you know, the tricky part at this back end of the draft is, you know, you look at the Vikings running backs, the backup options as they look now, Chandler and McBride, but they're both going in the 18th, 19th round. You see Abanikanda, who you mentioned, but Michael Carter goes off the board 4 picks before him. Both of those guys going in the 20th round. So you're in that range where there's a lot of guys going off the board very close together. But again, that is part of the uncertainty of those backfields in this range. So there is some names there that could potentially be interesting, and maybe one more running back would have helped round this up. But yeah, obviously, when we tweet this out on Twitter after, it's going to be that the running backs aren't going to be strong enough. But I think that we're absolutely loaded, obviously, at wide receiver. When we look through some of the other builds, it is interesting that we are an 8 wide receiver team. There is a team with 10 wide receivers. There's a couple of 8 wide receiver teams, 8 being the most common of it, followed by 9 wide receiver teams as well. So it's not that we've drafted the most wide receivers, but I do think that we have cornered the market on the upside and the talent of the guys that we have taken.
Yeah, and just that team there, Michael, who I know is in the chat, who does some stuff with Established to Run, he tends to always draft some quite nice, smart teams. So seeing him getting 10 wide receivers makes sense with like the round 3 and round 5.
Yeah, very much so, yeah.
I kind of like how our team was built. We leaned into the fragility in some ways of the quarterback position, and the running back position isn't the strongest in terms of Cook, Gibson, Charbonnet, Warren, Chuba, and Gus. But I think that there's enough there when you say, okay, we have CeeDee Lamb, Jalen Waddle, Keenan Allen, Jerry Jeudy, Chris Godwin. Before we even get to the Steelers wide receivers, something that you and Sean always talk about winning the flex, I feel quite confident that we have enough wide receiver firepower to have 4 starting wide receivers every week.
It's interesting too when we look through it that there is one other team with a 4 tight end build. That is the team drafting out of the 4 spot. But when we look, and they are a team that also waited. They were in the 8th or the 9th round where they took Njoku as their first tight end, then Higbee followed up with, and then Conklin and Ertz in the last round. So they're a 4 tight end build as well, kind of patching together that room a little bit. I'm sure they have more faith in.
Yeah, that's an autograph team as well. So.
Well, maybe would have been better off auto drafting, but they mightn't have auto drafted the entire draft. But the other part I was going to say though is the builds of these teams are all getting smarter. I think as best ball continues to have more content getting churned out, we see that they're all 3/2 quarterback teams. There's 1 4 quarterback team. Sorry, the team in 12 did go with 4 quarterbacks, but every single team has drafted 6 running backs, apart from Michael's team who drafted 5. But as you mentioned, Loxton and Breece Hall, Loxton and J.K. Dobbins is putting, kind of higher end investment in the running back position, and then is able to hold off. If it was a team, for example, like this that we started off and we have 3 running backs in those opening 10 rounds, I'm holding off. I'm happy to go with a 5 running back team in those situations too. So very, kind of, I guess we'd say standard builds across the board. But when I'm saying standard, I mean from what we would recommend rather than what we would see people do. We in previous years, there's all sorts of combinations that are putting up here on rosters. We're seeing that this year again, but a pretty smart room. Looking back through our draft, Tom, the one that I did mention was the Darren Waller one. So I think that I'm happier to have Pickens, because these are the things that you can't tell when you're making that selection. We take Deontay Johnson at his point at the 6'3", passed on Goddard for that selection, so we don't get Goddard. And that selection, he goes to 6'10". We take then, though, Pickens makes it back to us, which part of my thought process of potentially not taking Johnson is that you can get Pickens usually around later, which is obviously the cheaper price. But then to pair those 2 guys and then also to get the quarterback and Pickens really pairs that decision and makes it much clearer now than it was at the time. So in hindsight, I wouldn't change that. The one thing that would change in hindsight is probably how much you would have wanted Pickens at that pick, and the other thing that it would potentially change is you would have Waller there, so you're probably turning into a 2 to 3 tight end build rather than a 4 tight end build.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been, in hindsight, I don't feel too bad about it because the Steelers stack worked out perfectly for us. I think if Kenny Pickett hadn't made it back here, if Kenny Pickett had been drafted somewhere over here in this lull where quarterbacks just stopped going off the board, then it definitely would have been difficult. But Kenny Pickett made it back completely at ADP. By that point, we'd shored up like the running back room, and that felt a lot more comfortable.
With Charbonnet on the bring back too. We just need the Steelers to just put those points up and Charbonnet to just be on the chase back here.
So I've got the week 17 correlations up on the right there. We've got, you can see Pickett, Charbonnet, Jalen Warren, Deontay Johnson, Pickens, and Fant all in that game. And then Keenan Allen, Jerry Jeudy, Greg Dulcich all playing each other. Gus Edwards against Jalen Warren, and then James Cook against Hunter Henry. So it's a nicely correlated team without us really having to chase any of that. I think
that would be the other one, I guess I would mention, is when we look at that, we do have, the Chargers and the Broncos. So we could have potentially had Keenan Allen, Jerry Jeudy, and Russell Wilson. There's no way to know that Dulcich would have made it back through to us because Kincaid goes off the board to the team drafting at the 12th slot. But we could have had Jeudy and his quarterback. We could have had all three, but it didn't work out. But in hindsight, again, we go with Pickett and Howell. How do you feel? And the way it played out, obviously we stacked up more of the Washington offense. That worked out with the Howell pick. We talked already about the Pickett selection. What would you rather have Wilson in there? You mentioned you're kind of in on him this year.
I'm kind of okay with it because
we would have. The other thing that I would mention is if we take Wilson at the 11-10 and we wait to try and get Dulcich, and Dulcich goes off the board, say instead of Kincaid at the 12-1, then we're really in the tough situation with tight end. So somebody like, we take Jalen Warren at the 12-3, you're maybe stretching to like Sam Laporta there, who goes at the 13-7. You're really starting to be in a position where you're getting squeezed a little bit at the tight end position. So again, I think I love doing this after drafts, just going back and seeing what you would have maybe changed at the time and what would you change after. And that, Pickett, Howell, Samuel area really shuffles big time if we take Wilson and don't get Dulcich there.
Yeah, and I think, taking Curtis Samuel where you banged the table for him was a smart one because it gave us that avenue to that Washington stack that without that, if we'd been kind of looking, okay, well, which wide receivers would have given us a stack? I mean, could have pushed for Baker Mayfield probably in the 16th round ahead of ADP, which doesn't feel particularly fantastic. Yeah, it's not too pretty. We could have gone with Mac Jones in the 16th round to kind of give us a chance at the Mike Gesicki. Or maybe Gesicki had already gone, so it would have been Henry and like Devontae Parker. So I think the way that we played the secondary stack was great. Two quarterbacks, I mean, it definitely feels like a very low floor on these two quarterbacks.
It's a very low floor, but both quarterbacks going into their second season, if they make a leap, and let's say they end up in the area now where we see, even if it's only the 10th round, we're seeing Daniel Jones and Aaron Rodgers, but I could see them pushing up into that and being above, the Derek Carr, Aaron Rodgers tier of quarterbacks in this particular draft. And if they do that, that's also going to lead to them having a good season and the offense being good around them. And that's going to really elevate this entire roster. So there is a low floor. There's a chance that Howell isn't the quarterback, come week 4. But the other thing is there's a chance that he's, really pushing this offense towards that wild card range again. And that makes this offense this roster very exciting. So it's limited, but we're looking for potential teams to win tournaments. And I think that quarterback room really signifies a chance to win a tournament or a chance to set 10 pounds on fire or $10 on fire.
Yeah, and I'm definitely in on Kenny Pickett this year in terms of like, last year he only threw.
Sorry for interrupting again, but the one thing those two quarterbacks have too that I think gets swept past quite a bit is there is a rushing upside with those guys. That is
and it's not your Lamar Jackson level, but it's that kind of like, okay, well, can you give us a kind of Patrick Mahomes level of rushing? Yeah. But yeah, I mean, Kenny Pickett only threw 6 touchdowns last year across 12 games. And I looked it up at one point this offseason, and it was out of all the quarterbacks to start 10 games or more since the year 2000.
It's one of the worst of all time.
It was his touchdown rate of 1.7% was the 660th out of 679. So there's no way that it's not jumping. And even, NFL average for touchdown rate is 4.5%. So even if he gets like double it up to 3.4%, I think we could be looking at a decent offense in terms of fantasy points and weeks, which we need for fantasy. And ultimately, I think we've got enough firepower at wide receiver to make up for the occasional weeks where the quarterbacks are scoring like 14, 15 points rather than 25.
I also mentioned Tom's doing a lot of drafts over on his own channel that he has with Rich. I'll give you a chance. The links and the information are in today's show notes in the description, but I'll let you give it a plug as you'll be doing more of these drafts. And we'll do a final shout out for anyone with questions about this draft or about fantasy in general, best ball in general. Send them in the chat. But make sure you hit that thumbs up and subscribe button while you are in the chat as well. We would really appreciate that. Tom, obviously the Twitter handle, you're on the floor. Plug everything.
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on Twitter at NFL_TStrack, which is with a K. My writing work's all on Fantasy Pros at the minute. I'm definitely going to be very busy over the next month and a half with them. Loads of stuff about Best Ball, Dynasty, Redraft, and then my YouTube channel and podcast, Fantasy Sanctuary. Between me and Rich Cooling, we both cover Dynasty, Redraft, Best Ball during the season. I'll be doing DFS as well. Weekly streams this week. I've got John Daigle from 4 for 4 on. The week after, we've got Justin Herzig coming on. So plenty of good stuff. Last week we had Mike Leone on, which is an episode really worth going back. And of course, a couple of weeks ago we had Colm on. So a lot of good content on there.
Listen to the good episode. Listen to the good episode. Skip the one that I was on. But yeah, no, that was a fun time being on. But yeah, great run of guests there. Daigle's one of my favorites. Leone's awesome. So looking forward to that whole crew being over there as well. So check that out. That is the Fantasy Sanctuary. Haven't got any questions that came up. Everyone seems to, maybe we've covered the team in as much details as any questions that people would have. I think we ran through it pretty good, explain kind of our reasoning for each pick. So hopefully people have enjoyed it. This will also be posting up on the RotoViz Best Ball podcast channel. So if you're listening over there, you can also subscribe on the YouTube channel. That'll be in the show notes. If you're listening on YouTube, vice versa, you can get the audio formats of all these podcasts. So make sure you are subscribed. And if you are listening to this after the fact, let us know what the best or worst pick of this draft was in the comments. That's going to do us. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland. Pleasure having Tom on the show today. Thanks, Tom. We might have to try and sneak in a few of these. We'll see if the people who were saying, where is the DraftKings content? What do they come back and say? Thank you very much. We'll see what happens there, but we might have some more of these before this season. But me and Tom will probably be over in those FFPC streets as well, I'm sure. So we'll have some more stuff coming up, but always a pleasure. But until we are back again, my name, as I mentioned, is Colm Kelly. Until we are back, have a good one.